Well, good morning. How we doing? Beautiful weekend. You guys got an extra hour of sleep. You should be wide awake for today, right? Anybody excited for this upcoming week? Nobody. Nobody's excited. A couple of people are excited. Well, we're in this series, The Burnout Society, and I think many of us have experienced election burnout. Anybody else at that spot where you're like, okay, let's just get this thing done with, right? I'm going to actually do something we don't normally do. I'm going to tell you how you should vote this week. Why are you laughing, right? I actually did this already, but I'm just going to remind you because I think it's so important. In fact, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and one of the speakers shared that the COVID pandemic in 2020 is the first worldwide crisis in which the church lost ground. The first worldwide crisis where Christianity actually lost rather than gaining people. Which should speak something to us and should make us think about it. And so I don't want the election to be the next one. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you how you should vote. And the way you should vote is the way that Jesus tells us that we should live our lives every single day, which is putting other people first. With everything that we have, right? To love one another as God through Christ loved us. So your vote, the unique thing we said about a Christian vote, we said this a couple weeks ago in our politics series, is that we have the opportunity to leverage something that's been entrusted to us for the good of other people. So how can I love other people in the way that I vote? As you go and cast your vote Tuesday, I hope you will be thinking about that and processing through that, and I hope you will remember that our response, the response of those who place their faith in Jesus, matters far more than what happens with the election this week. So, all right, we'll start with that. Hey, my name's Seth, by the way, in case we haven't had the opportunity to meet. So I've been told that I talk too fast. So today, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to intentionally slow down and catch my breath. And the reason I'm going to intentionally do that is because over the last couple of months as a family and as a couple, Carrie and I have looked at each other several times and we've said, I'm just so exhausted, right? I am so tired. For us, soccer was the culprit, I think, this time around. All three of our kids wanted to be in soccer, which is great. You know, we love that they want to participate. We've said that you can do one activity at a time, but 3 people, that makes 3 activities at a time for our family. And it started in the end of July into August, and that was all great. But then September hit, and we had lots of birthdays, we had lots of church stuff, lots of activities, and we got to the last week of September. And I remember very vividly being in that place on Monday of that week, and I thought, tournaments are Saturday, this will all be done. And don't get me wrong, we're so glad our kids can do it. We love seeing them participate. We love seeing them grow in their skills and all that stuff. We love cheering for them, but we were tired. And so we're like, okay, all the tournaments are on Saturday. It'll all be finished. And then Hurricane Helene came and ruined North Carolina and pretty much everything else, right? And so we get to Saturday, and all of a sudden, the games are changed. We had 1 tournament game in the rain on Saturday, 2 more on Sunday, and then 2 more days of tournament games. And Caden's team won the tournament. That was great, but there were biting gnats from hell that invaded the soccer fields, and I don't know where those things came from. They were awful. You're laughing because some of you experienced it. I mean, they left welts. Days later, I'm like, what was that, And it was so tiring. And do you know what it felt like? That whole week felt kind of like this, like you're carrying a backpack of rocks around. And on Monday, you're thinking, okay, I can carry this backpack of rocks for 5 more days. It'll be okay. And you get to Saturday, and somebody's like, congratulations, you made it. Why don't you set your bag of rocks down for an hour and then put it back on, and we're going to throw a few extras on it, right? Because then there was the wet clothes for multiple days. Then there was the drying out of everything. And it was just like we already had our schedule planned for that week. Then all this extra stuff. It was so tiring. But wait, there's more, right? We just had Halloween, and that got mixed up on us here in Batesville and threw a whole nother wrench in things. And do you know what's coming? This is coming. He starts right now. Right? Which makes some of you angry because we haven't even had this yet. We're supposed to have this before we have Santa Claus, and we know what this happens. I mean, this quickly turns into something else, right? It turns into this, or more likely for many of us, it's this, right? And then you've got to go out and you've got to do this and got to find that special Christmas tree, which leads to having to do the outdoor lighting, right? And you ultimately open up the box and somebody was too lazy when they put the lights away to untangle them. And if that's not enough, if you're my age and you got kids my age, you know, our home is invaded with this. This is the worst invention I have ever known, right? And I swear, I mean, there is one thing that I think these guys do, and it's the random strand of lights that like the week of Christmas goes out in the middle of the tree. And you're thinking, how does this happen? These are supposed to be always lit lights. Why? How? They can't even get that right. And then you also got to work on this because you've done all the shopping, and then you've got to have this, the magical pastries. And then someone thought it would be a great idea to host this during this incredibly crazy season. And it's the holidays. You got to spend it with family, right? So then these people show up at your house and you're like, oh my goodness. And it quickly devolves into chaos with this. And some of you are wondering, how many more pictures does he have? And this is the whole sermon, right? I mean, just sit tight. We've got a lot more, right? And Christmas morning, it looks like this. And it's ironically, right? You know what we have very little of? We have very little of this. Joy, happiness, peace. Whose house looks like this at the holidays? I mean, are they humans? I mean, do they live? Is this just magazines? It's exhausting. I'm sure no one can relate, right? And if you can't relate personally, I just promise you there's somebody in your life who can, whether it's your kids, your grandkids, your nephews, your nieces, what. And then we just kind of wonder as a society, as a culture, how did we end up here? How did we end up as the burnout society? So we're going to slow down for a couple minutes. And we're going to do something we don't normally do on Sunday, which some of you are going to be like, this is kind of weird. Do they always do this? No, we don't. We're just going to take a collective deep breath. Kind of like in that video, it's like the mindfulness moment, okay? So I just want to invite you to take a deep breath in and then take a deep breath out. I'm going to do it 2 more times. Ready? Breathe in. Breathe out. 1 more. Breathe in. Breathe out. Can you feel the tension just kind of releasing? Last week when John was giving a sermon, I sat in that back row back there, and I realized there's this point where my shoulders, like I just tensed my shoulders up, and I'm like, why am I so tense? Take a deep breath. What a simple exercise that studies show like truly impacts our physiology. It helps us to slow our heart rate down. It helps us to just release some tension. And what's interesting, I'll just be kind of honest with you. I run so fast all the time, I don't even feel like I have time to do that for 2 minutes. To just pause in my day and say, okay, slow down. Release the tension. I have no place for breath. I just force myself to keep going. And I forget the simple fact that life requires breath. You don't breathe, you don't live. My grandmother, she died of a degenerative lung disease. For the last 2 years of her life, she just struggled to breathe. And she was on oxygen. She had a little tank she carried with her when she'd go to the store and whatnot. And the last 2 weeks of her life, particularly, because I remember being with her, it was just everything she could do to catch her breath. Humans respire, we breathe in and out between 22 and 25,000 times a day, and yet we are so unaware of our need to breathe. We only notice it when we're exercising, when we're in a tense conversation, when something stressful is going on. In fact, as a parent, I knew how important this was, and I don't get any accolades for being a good parent. Any parent would do this. I wanted to make sure my kids were breathing, right? And so when they would be in the crib and you couldn't see if their chests were moving up and down, sometimes I would take my finger and stick it under their nose to see if I could just feel that warm air coming out, because I wanted to make sure my kids could breathe. I just don't pay attention to if I can breathe. So today we're going to talk about rest. We're going to talk about restoration, because I think it's part of the Burnout Society, of which I am a card-carrying member, all right? Anybody else a member of the club? Is it just me? Right. Right? And last week, John defined burnout for us. He said it's when your soul can no longer bear the weight of your life. It's like, I can't go on anymore. And not in a morbid sense, like I want to hurt myself, harm myself sense, but it's like, I just can't do anymore. Like I can't extrovert anymore. I don't have the energy to do anything. And so what do? We end up retreating. Sometimes we retreat to binge watching a show. We retreat to scrolling on social media. We retreat to some kind of addiction, whether it's alcohol or pornography or something else. We retreat to numbing ourselves from pain, from emotion, to sleep. And depending on the time of year or the season of life that you're in, burnout is more or less real. And what's so interesting is we almost wear it as a badge of honor in our society. When somebody tells you that they don't have very much going on, you're like, how are you doing? I'm really worn out. I'm busy, If somebody says, I don't have anything going on, what do you think? You're so lazy. What are you doing with yourself, right? There are countless things that we could fill our time up with. If you're not busy, you're doing nothing. You're one of the laziest people I've ever met. And so to some degree, we all do it. We all know it, but we don't always know why we feel burnout. And we also don't always know what to do about our burnout. And so today, I'm hoping to address both of these things in a meaningful way. And I come to you not as an expert, I come as a user, okay? So I'm one who's still in the process of figuring it out, and I feel like I've made a little bit of progress, but sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, if you know what I'm talking about. In the cult classic Dumb and Dumber, there's a scene where Lloyd Christmas says to Harry, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Know what I'm talking about? Like, that's kind of where I find myself sometimes, where my eyes are just too big for my stomach. And I want more. In fact, in high school, there was a song my friends and I used to sing or listen to. It was on the radio, popular back then. Who needs sleep? Who needs sleep because you're never going to get it? Who needs sleep? Tell me what's that for? Who needs sleep because you're never going to get it? There's a guy who's been awake since the Second World War. Nobody knows that song. I did get a text message from somebody in Greensburg who knew it, right? And it's a good song, right? And so, we were doing all the things, right? We had class, we had homework, we were in all the extracurriculars, and we were up till 11, 12 at night, getting up 6 in the morning for school. We were exhausted, and it was like, oh, we're so great, because we're wearing ourselves out. My parents, they actually had limits on me. I was allowed to do one activity at a time. But then I went to college, and there were no limits. It was limitless, and my appetite was enormous. My freshman year in college, I ran for student government. I was taking 17 hours of class. I joined the hall council at my dorm. I had a radio program. I joined the psych club. I tried out for a play. I was in the chorale. I worked at the hall desk as a job for 20 hours a week. I led Bible studies. I was part of the yearbook staff. I joined something called Leadership Services, which is about helping to provide leadership growth opportunities for students on campus. We also had these things called picket dates, and they were like big group dates that your dorm floor would go on, and I went on one just about every weekend. Anytime somebody wanted to do a Walmart run, I was there. Anytime somebody wanted to go hang out at Steak and Shake till 1 or 2 in the morning, I was there. No joke, I was averaging 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night. And I would go home for breaks or for holidays, and I would just crash. I would sleep nonstop. I think my parents wondered, what in the world is wrong with you? Like, you are so exhausted. Why was I so exhausted? Because I had an appetite for more. There was always more. And I didn't want to miss out. Then I became a youth pastor, and countless opportunities. I'm single at the time, fill up the time with more. I remember camp season where I would go from one camp to the next camp to a 2-week mission trip in Mexico, and I was so tired. And then I became a parent. We got married and we had kids. And I'll never forget, we were about 18 months into parenting. And there was this particularly just crazy week. Carrie's working full-time. I'm working full-time. I took Madeline down to a wedding in Florida for 24 hours by myself, and we came back. It was just like you just hit the ground running everywhere. And I came to this realization, this is not good. I don't know why it took me, 33 years to figure that out. This is not good. There has to be something better. And what I thought I needed is what most of us want, right? I mean, we want rest. We want rest. You don't have to raise your hand, but I mean, how many of us would love to have that? And too often we think about rest as like hitting the pause button on crazy. Kind of like you hit the pause button if you're watching a movie or a TV show. It's like, I got to use the bathroom or get a refill or make some popcorn, whatever. And then you just sit back down and hit play, and it's like the crazy starts again. And we do that in life, and we'll go on a vacation for like a week and then restart crazy. And as much as we want rest, you know what I think we all need? What we need is restoration. And the good news for us is that Jesus wants to give us that. In fact, maybe you've heard these words that he spoke before. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Those of you who are carrying a heavy load in your life, I have something different for you. I have something better for you. He goes on, says this. He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," which was an invitation to what we would call discipleship. Come understand my ways. Come understand who I am and where I want to lead you. He says, "For I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul." That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Rest for our souls. In fact, it sounds so good. It's almost like, is that too good to be true? Like, could Jesus actually? I mean, I think there's a piece of us that wonders, is that even a reality? Could he actually do that? Could he give me rest for my soul? And then another part of us says, I don't even know what I would do with it if I had it. Right? I mean, if you were to find rest for your soul, do you know what you would do with it? If you found rest for your soul, do you know what you would do with it? That's the temptation. That's the struggle. Our lives are so overcrowded. We're so frantic and chaotic. We just crash and burn. I think there's a myth that many of us have bought into, myself included. The myth is that rest happens when the work is done. The work is never done. I don't know if you figured that out yet. I mean, with all of our time-saving devices, the work never finishes. There's just more and more work. I can take my work home with me now. My coworkers can get a hold of me 24/7. And then when the work is done, the paid work is done, there's all the unpaid work. You students, you've got all kinds of unpaid work. There's the cleaning of the house, there's the making of the meals, there's the taking care of the yard, there's the laundry, there's the getting kids ready for bed. It's wash, rinse, repeat. I mean, it just never ends. You go from your paid work to your unpaid work, and it is endless. So I think there's actually something new for us to learn. In fact, I think this is kind of the key for all of us, and that's that because work never stops, we have to learn to stop working. But it's our addiction to busyness, it's our addiction to being occupied and never being bored that leads us to continue our work. Again, whether paid or unpaid, all the activity, all the stuff, that all quantifies or counts as work. And because of that, our identities have gotten tied up into what it is that we do, forgetting that we're human beings, not human doings. Think about Jesus, the Son of God, come to earth, and he had the most important work. I mean, we could argue he had the most important work of anybody ever, like in the history of the world. He had the most important work, which is redeeming the world. And yet, he could basically pull back, and he could essentially say, the work isn't going to stop, so I'm going to stop working. There's an account in the book of Matthew where Jesus receives news that his cousin, John the Baptist, has been beheaded at the hands of Herod Antipas. It's a terrible situation. And I can only imagine what it was like to receive that news. Here's what Matthew tells us Jesus did. It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Now, the word solitary or solitary place, it means like a lonely place. He retreated into the wilderness. And so he got in a boat. He went across the Sea of Galilee, which is a misnomer. It's really a lake. It's not even that big of a lake, if you see it. And so he tries to take time to get away. When Mark retells the story, Mark says that Jesus and his disciples, they were so busy, so occupied with the needs of the people all the time that there wasn't even time for them to eat. So you can just imagine how much they're just running from thing to thing to thing to thing. And yet Jesus, who's fully God, fully man, who understands that rest was a part of what God did in creation at the end of his 6 days of creation, he took the seventh day to step back and to marvel at what he had done to just rest and be restored. Jesus looked for that time. He looked for that time. Now, let me ask you the question. When is the last time you took time to step back from crazy and to actually be restored? When's the last time you stepped away from grief that you're experiencing? A difficult relationship? Something going on in school? Maybe it's something you heard here that was a challenge or an invitation and inspiration, and you weren't quite sure what you should do with it, and you just kind of walked away, not really even thinking about it. When's the last time you took time to step away? Jesus made time for this, or at least he tried to. The people went looking for him. The continuation of this is hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. So they see him get in the boat, going across the lake, and they're like, oh, we'll meet him on the other side, right? So they crowd around to the other side. They're like there to greet Jesus and his disciples when they get over there. They're watching where he's going. They're waiting for him. And so Matthew says that when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, I think his heart sunk, and he's like, I can't carry this backpack any longer, right? These rocks are just weighing me down. That's not what actually happened. He felt the needs of the people. The text says he had compassion on them. He had compassion on them because he saw that they had a need he was capable of filling. Now, how true is that for us? When we see opportunities come our way and we're like, okay, if I don't do it, who else will, right? If I don't step in, nobody else is doing it, so I'm willing, or I've got some skill set, or I've got something to give people that they need, right? And so we let that tug on us, drive us into saying yes. We feel a duty and a responsibility. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He was already tired. The disciples were already tired. He taught, he healed people for that day. Then it got to be evening time. His disciples are like, we're exhausted. Send the people home, Jesus. You may remember what happens. He says, why don't you feed them? And they go and they collect, 5 loaves of bread, 2 little fishes, and they feed everybody. And then I think Jesus, knowing that he needed rest, burnout's on the horizon, I think he waited until dark on purpose. I could be wrong. This is just my own thing, so don't ever quote me on this. But I think he waited till dark because there were no lights. People couldn't see where he went after dark. If he dismissed the crowds while it's still light out, they're not going to leave. They won't leave him alone. So he sends his disciples on a boat, and then he dismisses the crowds. Matthew says after that, after he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. He went to go find this place of rest, this place of restoration. Fully God, fully man, never sinned, recognized the importance of rest. When God established the nation of Israel, he actually gave them a command. It was part of their law. Think about what this communicates about God. I command you to rest once a week for an entire day. I command you to take a day off. That's a pretty good God, isn't it? Who says, you need rest. Do you know why it's so important? Because rest reminds us who we are and whose we are. It reminds us who we are, that the world doesn't revolve around us. That it will keep turning if we somehow disappear. And it reminds us whose we are, that God has generously provided for us. He has met our needs. And so because of that understanding, Jesus was able to say, I can take time away. I can rest. Because he understood something that I think we often miss, that you are more important than the work you produce. You are more important than the activities that you put on your schedule. And it's amazing that the Son of Man, the Son of God, rested, but we somehow act like we don't need it. I can keep going. I can keep driving myself into the ground. Last year on sabbatical, I started reading a book that really helped me to think through some of these things. And one of the things that I had never considered is that every yes I make is 1,000 no's, right? I'm necessarily choosing something, which is kind of funny because when we talk about FOMO, fear of missing out, when I say something or agree to something because of FOMO, I'm actually saying no to all kinds of other things. Like I'm necessarily making myself miss out on all kinds of other things that there won't be time to do. And we never think about the significance of what our yeses mean and how it impacts everything that we then necessarily have to say no to. There's this book called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Mortals, people being people who aren't going to, exist on this planet forever. 4,000 weeks is the average lifespan. Take a look at what the author says here. He says, the harder you struggle to fit everything in, the more of your time you'll find yourself spending on the least meaningful things. And here's why that is. He says, if you never stop to ask yourself if the sacrifice is worth it, your days will automatically begin to fill not just with more things, but with more trivial or tedious things, because they've never had to clear the hurdle of being judged more important than something else. We never had to actually think, is this worth me spending my time on? Is this worth me getting worked up about? Is this worth me investing into? When we say yes to everything, we lose sight of what actually matters, and we fill our days up with things that are unimportant. And again, I want you to hear this today, that your work, the ways you fill your time, your entertainment, your schedule, it's not the most important thing about you. It's not. So we overload ourselves, we experience stress, we have upset stomachs, we have anxiety, we're sleepless, we have strained relationships. Why? So I feel important for 5 minutes. I feel like I've plugged a hole in a sinking ship, right? I mean, oh my goodness, so I don't miss out. I think God looks at us, he's like, you're crazy. You're crazy. I'm not leading you there. Why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you doing this to your family? Why are you doing this to your parents? Why are you doing this to your spouse? Do you know where God leads us? The most famous king of Israel wrote the most famous psalm, Psalm 23. And in it, he likens himself to a sheep. Now, throughout the pages of the Bible, people are likened to sheep 500 times. I don't know about you, but if I could choose a spirit animal, it would not be a sheep. I wouldn't choose a spirit animal. But if I could be likened to anything, it wouldn't be a sheep, right? I mean, they're cute, don't get me wrong, with their bulbous bodies and their thin little legs and their lack of opposable hooves. But there is nothing useful about a sheep. Really, I mean, there's nothing useful. They are helpless. In fact, to the point where I sometimes wonder if God created sheep for the sole purpose of painting a picture for us of what we are like in relation to him. Because sheep cannot thrive on their own. They need someone. And they create this frustratingly beautiful picture of why we need God. Which means if you're here today and you feel like you're just not thriving at life, and you're questioning, what you believe and who God is, man, I hope you'll lean in, because I think there is a strong invitation for all of us. And what David says here, in fact, here's what he says. He says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Another way of translating this is I lack nothing. There's nothing in my life that I need. There might be things that I want, but there's nothing that I need. There was an Old Testament name for God. It was Jehovah Jireh. which means God's my provider. He's the one who's looking out for me and providing for my needs. And let's be honest, how often rather, is our want for more the thing that drives us to the place of burnout? More money, more opportunities for our kids, more stuff, more things. More. And what David says is that when God is in his rightful place, I have everything I need. He continues on, he says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. There's our word. He restores my soul. What a serene picture. It's not endlessly busy. It's this pastoral serene. Listen, if your life is chaos, if you're living in chaos, if you're just constant frenetic activity, I can tell you God isn't leading you there. He's not leading you there. A shepherd doesn't lead his sheep to chaos. David says, he makes me lie down. Go back if we could. He makes me lie down. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. That sounds like a dream, right? Especially if you're running yourself and your family ragged. Notice what he says here, that restoration begins with rest. Restoration begins with rest. There's an author, Philip Keller, who's no longer living, but he himself was a shepherd up in Canada. And he wrote a number of books I've really appreciated, but one of those was A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 21. And so he tries to look at this psalm from the eyes of a shepherd, which is what David would have been doing as he wrote this psalm, because he had been a shepherd before he was a king. And he talked about 4 things that a sheep needed to be free from in order to rest. They needed to be free from fear, free from tension, free from aggravation, and free from hunger. Free from fear, free from tension, free from aggravation, and free from hunger. And what Philip Keller noted is that sheep are incapable of providing any of those for themselves. Incapable. They need someone. They need someone to be their shepherd. Sheep are helpless. It's the presence of the shepherd that leads to a restored soul. Not the presence of something, not the absence of work, it's the presence of someone. And 1,000 years later, Jesus stepped onto the pages of history and said, I'm the good shepherd you've been looking for. Come to me, all you who are weary and tired, and I will give you rest. Seek me and find restoration for your soul. Have you ever noticed how our society's way of dealing with burnout doesn't actually help? Like the endless scrolling, what happens when you're looking on Instagram or you're looking on Pinterest or Facebook? I mean, you see, well, that mom threw a pretty awesome party for her kid, right? We've got to try and one-up that. Or they took a pretty awesome vacation, or look at their new car or their new house, or look at what they're doing, right? It doesn't lead us to rest. It leads us to a place of envy. It leads us to a place of headed toward more. But God, when he established the people of Israel, he established something that's called the Shabbat. When I was in Israel a year and a half ago, I experienced it firsthand, and it is a fascinating thing to experience because everything stops. Sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, to an extreme, to the point where there are Gentile elevators where you're allowed to push buttons, and then there are Shabbat elevators where you're not allowed to push buttons, and you just go stand there and you wait until the elevator goes to your floor. Because pushing a button is work. You don't turn your oven on, it's programmed to automatically turn on. You don't turn the coffee pot on, that's work. You simply cease working to rest. And then there's our extreme, where the work never stops. Maybe wisdom is somewhere in the middle. So let me ask you, when's the last time you disengaged from work to allow the shepherd to lead you? Whether that work is your unpaid work, your paid work, your school work, whatever. When's the last time you just said, God, you're my shepherd. You provided everything I need. I'm going to pause in these moments. Instead of focusing on what I need to do, I'm going to focus on being. See, the benefit of the Sabbath is, again, it reminds you to surrender control, because control's an illusion anyway. There is so little in life that you and I can actually control. And what if true rest isn't about mastering your schedule, but about surrendering control of it? We say, Lord, I need you, except in the area of my schedule. God, I need you. Every hour I need you, except when I'm saying yes to things that I shouldn't be saying yes to. When's the last time you asked God if you should say yes to something? When's the last time you asked God if you should sign your kids up for another activity? When's the last time you invited God into the space of your schedule? Because every single yes we make is a sacrifice of many, many, many no's. And so why not bring God into that and ask him to help lead you with purpose and to remind you who you are, a person, a human being with limits, and whose you are, one who's in the hands of a good shepherd who provides for all of your needs. Not necessarily all your wants, but certainly all your needs, because you're a recipient of his incredible grace. So as we close, I have two questions for you to think about. The first one is, who is your shepherd? Who is your shepherd, and where is your shepherd currently leading you? I mean, if that image of sheep is right, that human beings need to be led by someone or something, we're all looking to someone or something to lead us. The question is, where is that someone or something leading you? And is that good? And if you're being led to burnout, I can just tell you it is not God leading you, because he will not lead you to that place, because we know burnout isn't good. He wants good for you. If you've never made the decision to let God lead you, to surrender your life to Jesus, man, today could be a great day to do that. As you say, look, I'm tired of doing this on my own. I'm tired of saying yes to everything, and I'm so exhausted all the time. This is an invitation and a space and a place where you can say, God, I want to surrender to you. I want you to be my shepherd. And then the second question I have for you is, what's one change you can make this month to allow the Good Shepherd to lead you to rest? The crazy of Christmas is already upon us. It's going to come especially after Thanksgiving. You got basically a month from now until Thanksgiving. So what's one change you could make? Maybe it's scheduling a day off, looking at how much PTO you got left in the year, and you can say, okay, I'm gonna take an intentional day. I'm not gonna fill it up with more busyness. I'm just gonna pause. I'm gonna step back. I'm gonna listen to some worship music. Maybe I'm gonna go take a walk outside and pray. I'm gonna make a list of the things that are burdens to me. I'm gonna hand those over to God and invite him into the space of those things. Maybe a whole day is a little overwhelming for you. You're like, I don't know what I do with all that, Seth. Okay. Choose 2 hours. Book 2 hours. Listen, left on its own, we will move in the direction of chaos. Life moves in the direction of chaos. It's like the second law of thermodynamics or something like that, right? What if we step back and say, I don't want to descend into chaos. I want to let God lead me to somewhere different. You will experience restoration. I know, because it's something that I've begun to do. Fridays, I don't have any kids at home. It's become my Sabbath day. It's a time for me to focus on my relationship with God. It's a time for me to put my phone in do not disturb mode. It's a time for me to rest, to do something fun. I like to do something fun too, because I like to have fun. But I can tell you, when I do that, when I am rested and restored, I am a far better father. I'm a far better husband. I'm a far better leader. It's when I run myself to my limits that I'm ready to crash and burn. So my challenge to you is to find a time this month, do it one time this month. And you might be saying, Seth, I can't do it. Well, let me ask you, Has doing what you've been doing restored you, or is it killing you? Has it helped you to be a card-carrying member of the burnout society? Maybe it's time to try something different. And I promise you, give it a shot. You will not regret it. Come talk to me about it. I would love to hear what God does in you and through you from that time. I'm going to pray for us. Heavenly Father, this is, it's hard in the culture that we live in that's just go, 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 run, 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 say yes to everything. It's exhausting. So many of us, we've been living a rat race. We need to step back and pause and to be reminded of who we are and whose we are. Lord, there may be somebody in here today who's never said, yeah, I want Jesus to be the Lord of my life. I want him to be my shepherd. And God, I just pray that you would give that person courage to begin moving in your direction, to exploring what it means to trust you with their life. God, help every single one of us, if we're going to call you Lord, to invite you into the area of our time so that you can be Lord even of that. God, thanks for this time together. Give each one of us wisdom to know what we need to do. Give us the courage over the next month to find time to step away, to be restored. We hold these things before you and pray in Jesus' name. Amen.